Hello and welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm editor Clinton Griffiths coming to you from our newsroom here in northern Indiana as we bring you the latest updates on news from around the agricultural industry. We're going to get to a story we've been following all week regarding dicamba and the use of dicamba across the country. The EPA issuing a response to an appeals court decision that blocked the sale and use of 3 dicamba-based weed killers. The EPA saying late last evening that existing stocks of the 3 affected products, Ingenia, Fexapan, and Extendamax, can be used for a limited time under the requirements of the invalidated label. EPA will be enforcing proper application procedures during the use of remaining dicamba stocks. Now, Syngenta's Tavium herbicide was not part of that Ninth Circuit Court ruling. The company says it is still available to use. Today, rural broadband advocacy group Connect Americans Now hosting a virtual briefing on the digital divide in rural America, the urgency of connectivity in the era of COVID-19, something absolutely appropriate. Now, part of that conversation, we have John Conrady with Connect Americans Now and Betsy Huber, president of National Grange. Thank you both for joining us today. Let's start with you, John, and the message. What did we talk about during this event, and who was the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Clinton. So the conversation today really centered around the urgency to bridge the digital divide for folks living in rural parts of the country. This was a challenge that existed before the COVID-19 crisis, but the pandemic and the implications have really exacerbated many of the challenges associated with the lack of broadband connectivity. And so the conversation today is centered around what are those challenges, what are the impacts on specific constituencies like farmers, like ranchers, like educators, and like rural communities, like veterans, and what can Congress do to tackle the challenge?
Ms. Huber, you're a panelist on that discussion as president of the National Grange. Talk about your concerns and what message did you share?
Yes, thank you. We were privileged to be a part of that panel. The National Grange has been advocating for rural broadband for almost 20 years now. Just this, as John said, this pandemic has really spotlighted the need for broadband in rural areas for education, especially. Suddenly in mid-March, the schools were all closed and students had no way to learn except virtually. And that was terrible situation for many of our rural areas that don't have access. Healthcare is another problem area for rural America. Less doctors, less hospitals, and distance to travel to doctor's appointments. So education and healthcare are the 2 urgencies, along with a lot of other reasons why we need connectivity now.
Yeah. You know, John, I know we've talked about this before in the past that there has been some movement on this front. We have seen some money start to pour in and focus on rural broadband. Where do we stand today, and how much further do we need to get this done?
Well, you're exactly right. We have seen some positive progress. We see Congress act to improve the nation's broadband mapping data. We've seen federal regulators work to clear some regulatory barriers to innovative solutions that can help increase the pace and cost effectiveness of deployments. But in order to fully tackle this challenge, what we really need to see is Congress deploy and allocate additional resources that will bring hybrid network deployments that can be deployed the most rapidly and in the most cost-effective manner to all parts of rural America that are unserved or underserved as quickly as possible. And that's why we're, as an organization that represents more than 270 members in our coalition, are advocating for Congress to take swift action on that.
Ms. Huber, from a National Grange perspective, has enough been done yet, or what would you like to see done here in the near future?
It's always about money, so more funding, of course. Just removing the barriers. There's still a lot of regulatory barriers, a lot of red tape that providers have to go through in order to get the service out there. Funding for the FCC to go ahead with their revised mapping. We're thankful that Congress passed that Data act, but now we need funding to put it into practice and to get that mapping completed so that we know where the exact areas are that need connectivity now.
And John, that's been a big challenge, right? Is to really even get our arms around what areas have some connectivity, what areas have some speed, but not broadband speed. I know in our own area here in Indiana, where my family lives, we're limited with the number of service providers that we can even choose from. I mean, we really have one real option. How close are we to getting a little better grip on, how big the problem is?
Well, this really strikes to the heart of this challenge. According to the FCC's most recent data, about 18.3 million Americans lack access to broadband. A recent study found that number is probably, in reality, closer to 40 to 50 million Americans. So there are current funding programs underway, things like the so-called RDOF at the FCC that will deploy more than 20 billion. But that 20 billion will only be deployed to try to connect those 18 million that we are aware lack connectivity. The part of what we need to do as a nation to truly tackle this challenge is allocate resources for the many, many millions of Americans beyond those 18 million who are stuck behind the broadband gap and who the nation's broadband mapping data are not capturing today.
Can we do it? Is the technology there to get this done? Is it just a money thing?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen American innovators step up. We've seen companies like Microsoft, through their Airband initiative, commit to bringing broadband service. Microsoft, for example, has already brought service to more than 1 million rural Americans who are previously unserved or underserved. We've seen technologies like TV white space technology be able to come in and lower the cost of deployments that are using an all of the above approach. So we absolutely have the know-how, the will to do this. It's just a matter of and both parties in Congress have spoken about the urgency of this. It's just about getting it over the last piece of the end zone in order to get true action on this.
I want to thank you both for joining us. John Conradi there, Betsy Huber, thank you for joining us on Farm Journal Live and sharing this conversation that we know will continue to follow as the weeks and months move forward. Looking at some other news right now, the major grains all lower here on a Tuesday following Monday's crop progress report. The nation's corn crop now 97% planted. That's about 3% above the 5-year average. As for conditions, 75% rated good to excellent. Moving on to soybeans, 86% of that crop now planted, well above that 79% of the 5-year average. As far as conditions go on soybeans, 72% of that crop rated good to excellent. John Payne with Daniels Trading joins us now on Farm Journal Live. And John, we're at a time when prices, they tend to start hitting some marketing year highs. Where do we sit right now with where we are, given how planting's gone, some of the weather issues we're facing, and what the market is trying to overcome, given the coronavirus and all the headwinds there?
Yeah, that's a lot. I told you before I came on, I didn't want to go in and just be this huge bear because, we know the situation. That you're going to get a good reminder of it on Thursday, and I think there's probably a little bit of a get down ahead of that report, especially in the case of corn. But from where we sit, long run, most of this is baked in my opinion. I think a lot of it depends on obviously the ethanol industry going forward. But if you're a long run thinker here, and I'm talking a couple of years. This is an opportunity for, I think, a lot of accumulation of upside positions as far as hedges go. And I think the next, say, 3 months will probably provide that soft market to buy into. Unfortunately, for the producer side, they've got to make room for supply that's going to come online. And at this point, it looks like it's going to be plenty large. You can't debate that as far as acreage goes. But the debate now will be on yield, what this weather is going to look like going forward, and then the currency. I think those factors, especially in corn and soybeans, are going to be a huge, huge place here that could really flip the fundamentals on their heads. You got to be a little careful here to not get too bearish on the fundamentals that we're talking about, because we are at 325 as far as that old crop price.
Trying not to get too bearish, but obviously too many things out there right now to get too bullish either. We know we have this WASDE report, supply-demand report, due out on Thursday. Mm-hmm. What are you going to be looking for? Do you expect any fireworks?
Well, I mean, I think the fireworks probably come before it. We're going to get reminded of what 97 million acres or 96 million acres on a 178 yield looks like. that's pretty much certain. I think the fireworks probably come on the downside if it comes to demand. And the worry you have is they drop old crop demand down, specifically in corn, to increase supply for next year as well. So for corn, I think you probably prepare to be a little bearish. Wheat, I'm a little more friendly. I think, especially on the Chicago side, you're going to get reminded of bullish supplies. I think you'll get reminded of bullish supplies on rice. And that's another market that's just been on a tear lately until the last 3 days. And then, specifically markets like cotton, I think that's more of a weather play. So my game plan, if you're looking to make one and you're put me to it, would be to wait. I like the long side here. I just would wait until delivery passes. The first notice day is the first of the month of July. I think there's a lot of folks who need to price before then, and the spreads between old crop and new crop aren't wide enough to really encourage those folks to take some risk and hold on to it for another 6 months. So I think you're going to see new crop prices fall, probably bottom out here, and I wouldn't be shocked if we make a low on the first of the month, and then kind of trade that weather story as July approaches.
The strength of the dollar is pulled back some. Is that going to help us in the next few months?
Strength of the dollar will be a huge player, and I think that's where, if you're bullish, you really can't get too bearish here. You can't get too pessimistic, because in reality things could flip very quickly on the currency side. And I think that's where this are we on the third fiscal bailout or the fiscal stimulus? I'm not sure what number we're on, but that'll be the big debate going forward. Who's going to get paid what, especially as this economy reopens? And if we happen to pass what the Democrats have on the table right now, I think that's tremendously bearish to the dollar, and I think you can see markets like wheat really run. So we're not going to know for a little bit. I think the economies are starting to open up. In my opinion, markets like cotton are really good opportunities here, because I think the U.S. consumer has been pent up for a long time here, 3 months. I was in a Dick's Sporting Goods yesterday. There were 50 people in line looking to buy goods.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think, we've never seen this before in the history of our country, where we have but we were actually taking people out of the country at that time. We're suppressing demand on purpose and telling people you can't do things, and at the same time we're giving them money. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, I was in the Navy. The best times were when you got off the boat after a 6 to 8 month deployment, because you had a bunch of money in your bank account. And I really think you're going to see, and not to use a lazy comparison here, spend like a drunken sailor. I think you're going to see some optimism, especially if the economy opens up. And that's where a market like cotton, you can point to all the supplies and the acreage that the USDA is talking about, but demand is so difficult to estimate right now. And I think everything's down. So I tend to skew bullish. I think long run skew bullish, short term be prepared for some ugly price action in the next couple of weeks.
I don't want to keep you too long, but let's talk a little bit about the protein sector. We've seen some of the slaughter numbers kind of gain back. Cattle just a couple thousand off a year ago. Yesterday, hogs making some comebacks on their processing capacity. Yeah. Where does the protein sector sit in your opinion?
Again, I think it all starts with food service demand. We had, for example, 16 Major League Baseball stadiums were feeding 30,000 plus people a day, every day. And that isn't happening right now. So what happens when those folks I think that's going to cause the jolt we need. In the near term, you can't fake the livestock industry. I don't want to say fake it, but we've essentially put in a lot of fake money into the economy to kind of take the place for the losses. These cattle and hogs are still coming, and then you have to find a home. And in the case of cattle, I think it's restaurant demand, specifically food service opening up. I think that's a big scene here. And then on the hog side, getting schools open and I think getting caught up, but that's going to take some time. So if you're bullish cattle, if you're bullish hogs, I think you got to go out into 2021. That's where I would be looking at it. The short run, a really interesting watch will be June fat cattle here over the next week, live cattle versus the August, because June is in delivery. There's no speculation in it anymore. And there really isn't most cattle guys I talk to couldn't tell you where cash is right now. If you have a good relationship with Tyson, it might be 110. If you have no relationship with anybody, you might be selling 95. So I don't really think anybody has a clue, and I think this is some opportunity here in the near term for us to find that out.
All right, a lot of moving pieces here as we go forward. John, thank you so much
Thanks
for your
having
insights
me.
here. Yeah, absolutely, on Farm Journal Live. We appreciate all of you for joining us on Farm Journal Live. Of course, if you'd like to keep up with the conversation, please do that by going over to agweb.com, or you can go to agweb.com/coronavirus for the very latest happenings in what's going on around the agricultural industry. From all of us here at Farm Journal, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great afternoon. It started as social distancing, self-isolation, and caring for loved ones. A time for agriculture to be proud, to be essential. Now, it's changing. While states start to reopen and jobs resume, out here, the clouds are building. The path is uncertain. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. But we'll farm on. This soil is soaked in generations of sweat, of reinvention, of grit. Farm on is a calling. It's a mantra, a mindset. When the horizon dims and things turn dark, we'll find the light. We may be doing this for you, but we're also doing it for them. 2020, now's the time to farm on.